Coal dust gets into the lungs in a way that never really leaves, and Charles Bronson knew that feeling long before Hollywood ever learned his name. He carried it with him the way he carried everything else from those early years in Pennsylvania, quietly, heavily, and without complaint to anyone who wasn't owed one. What separated him from the thousands of other struggling men who came out of that era wasn't raw talent alone, and it certainly wasn't luck. It was the kind of weight a person accumulates when they have already survived something genuinely hard before the cameras ever roll. By the time the world decided to pay attention to Charles Bronson, he had already been a coal miner, a combat soldier, a Purple Heart recipient, and a man who had buried enough hardship to fuel a career lasting 5 decades. The story of how he got there, and what it cost him, is the kind of biography that makes every other Hollywood rise to fame narrative feel shallow by comparison. Born on November 3, 1921, in Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania, under the name Charles Dennis Binsky, he came into the world as one of 15 children born to Lithuanian immigrants who survived on whatever the land and the mines could offer. Coal mining wasn't an occupation in the Binsky household. It was the difference between eating and not eating. And young Charles descended into those mines to contribute before most children his age had settled on a favorite subject in school. English arrived slowly, in a home where Lithuanian and Russian dominated the air. And even years later, when he entered military service, his accent ran thick enough that fellow soldiers genuinely assumed he had been born somewhere else. He graduated high school first among all 15 siblings, a fact that sounds modest until you consider what the Binsky household actually looked like. And in 1943, he enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Force and left Pennsylvania for a war that would demand everything he had learned to withstand and more. Assigned to the 39th Bombardment Group's 61st Bombardment Squadron, stationed out of Guam, Bronson served as a Boeing B-29 Superfortress aerial gunner, flying combat missions against the Japanese home islands throughout World War II. 25 missions, and he came back from all of them, earning a Purple Heart for combat injuries along the way. Any discussion of the stillness he brought to action film roles, that coiled, unhurried quality making audiences feel something was perpetually about to happen, has to account for what 25 combat missions in a gunner's seat actually does to a person's relationship with ordinary danger. That presence wasn't manufactured in a studio. It arrived with him from somewhere much colder and much higher. The post-war years were directionless at first, filled with odd jobs until a Philadelphia theater group hired him to paint stage landscapes and discovered, almost incidentally, that he could also act. He shared an apartment in New York City with Jack Klugman, both of them pressing toward acting careers with the particular determination of men who understood that going backward wasn't an option. Hollywood followed, with Bronson studying at the Pasadena Playhouse and assembling minor credits while waiting for something larger. His first film came in 1951, when director Henry Hathaway cast him in You're in the Navy Now, reportedly because he was the only actor available who could vomit on command, which tells you something honest about how unglamorous the actual work of building a screen career tends to be. That same year produced 2 more films under John Sturges, The Mob and The People Against O'Hara, establishing a professional relationship that would return dividends over the following decade. Television covered the gaps through the early 50s, with Bronson appearing on The Roy Rogers Show, playing boxer Cauliflower McPug alongside Red Skelton, and co-starring with Lee Marvin in the espionage series Biff Baker USA. The name change came in 1954, when Charles Binsky became Charles Bronson after noticing the Bronson Gate at Paramount Studios, a practical decision shaped by the anti-communist climate of an era in which a name carrying Eastern European associations had become a liability in a Hollywood that scrutinized its own people for any reason it could find. House of Wax in 1953 gave him genuine visibility, with Bronson playing Vincent Price's assistant Igor in a horror film that grossed more than $23 million and ranked as the 4th highest earner in the United States that year. The Library of Congress later placed it in the National Film Registry on the strength of its cultural and historical significance, meaning one of Bronson's early supporting performances now exists in permanent American preservation. Leading man status didn't follow immediately, but by the late 50s he was landing substantial supporting roles, including Sturgis's war drama Never So Few, which put him in front of audiences large enough that the studios kept noticing him. Sturgis and Bronson reunited in 1960 for The Magnificent Seven, the Western that would rank among the defining action films of its generation and eventually earn its own place in the National Film Registry. Bronson received $50,000 for his role as one of 7 gunfighters defending a Mexican village, a modest fee against what the film eventually produced, and the movie swept through Europe with an enthusiasm that American audiences took considerably longer to match. Then came The Great Escape in 1963, Sturgis directing again, the World War II prisoner of war drama that worked on a $4 million budget and earned a Golden Globe nomination for Best Picture, while establishing Bronson as someone audiences actively sought out rather than simply tolerated when he appeared on screen. European cinema moved on him in 1968, while he was working on Via Rides, and French producers wasted no time casting him in Adieu l'ami, opposite Alain Delon, filmed in Paris and Marseille, which brought in over $6 million in France alone. Sergio Leone's spaghetti western, Once Upon a Time in the West, followed, and sold millions of tickets across Italy, France, and Germany, before the National Film Registry eventually claimed that film as well. Europe recognized what it had before Hollywood did, and when Bronson returned to American cinema carrying that international reputation, the studios received him differently than they had sent him out. The partnership with director Michael Winner produced The Mechanic, The Stone Killer, and then Death Wish in 1974, with Bronson playing Paul Kersey, a New York architect who becomes a vigilante after his family is destroyed by street criminals. Critics attacked it for graphic content, and audiences made it earn $22 million, cementing Bronson in a cultural identity built around moral complexity and physical consequence that would define the action film genre for years beyond his own career. 4 sequels Kersey's story across the next 2 decades, and by 1975, Bronson ranked as the 4th biggest box office draw in the United States, behind Robert Redford, Barbra Streisand, and Al Pacino. For a man who had come out of Pennsylvania coal country as one of 15 children, that ranking carries a weight the numbers themselves cannot fully hold. The late 70s and early 80s kept him working steadily through a collaboration with director J. Lee Thompson across films including St. Ives, Love and Bullets, Cabo Blanco, and Death Hunt, where he co-starred again with Lee Marvin in a pairing that the New York Times described as 2 seasoned professionals giving their characters genuine substance. The television film Raid on Entebbe in 1977 earned him a Golden Globe nomination for Best TV Movie based on a true historical event. And in 1986, he stepped away from his standard template entirely to play Union leader Joseph Yablonsky in the HBO film Act of Vengeance. No gun, no violence, nothing from the standard Bronson playbook. And the critical reception confirmed what some had already suspected. The tough guy persona had always been a deliberate choice, rather than the ceiling of what he could do. Jill Ireland entered his life in a way that revealed he was capable of something his directors rarely thought to ask for. She was married to his friend and fellow actor David McCallum, when Bronson reportedly told McCallum directly that he intended to marry his wife, a statement that could have ended the friendship and instead turned out to be accurate. Ireland and Bronson married in 1968, building a family with 7 children and making her a presence across many of his films throughout the years that followed. She became the center of a private life he guarded carefully, the 2 of them functioning as a unit inside a Hollywood environment specifically designed to pull people apart. And the films they made together carry a quality that his solitary work never quite reaches. Breast cancer arrived in 1984 and altered everything they had built together. Bronson stayed beside her through surgeries and treatments that consumed 6 years, while Ireland turned the experience outward by writing Life Wish, a memoir about her battle that reached people facing similar circumstances and gave them something to hold on to. She died in 1990, and everyone close to Bronson described afterward a man changed in ways that went deeper than grief and never fully reversed. The Hollywood Walk of Fame placed a star for Ireland on Hollywood Boulevard in 1991, and the television film Reason for Living, the Jill Ireland story, with Joe Clayburgh in the lead, listed Ireland posthumously as executive producer, an acknowledgement of what she had built from the worst years of her life. Bronson kept working after her death, but carried the absence visibly in everything he did. Kim Weeks became his wife in 1998, but Alzheimer's disease had already begun working against him by then, steadily dismantling the memory and concentration of a man whose entire screen presence had depended on a specific kind of internal discipline. His latter years required full-time care, and the actor Roger Ebert had once described as looking just as menacing in person as on screen, grew quieter and more removed from the industry he had spent 50 years building. He had made one specific arrangement for after his death, a cane hollowed out to hold Jill Ireland's ashes, so they would remain together regardless of what came next. Charles Bronson died on August 30th, 2003, at 81 years old, with pneumonia listed as the immediate cause and metastatic lung cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and congestive cardiomyopathy named as contributing factors. Brownsville Cemetery in West Windsor, Vermont, received him, the hollowed cane and its contents buried alongside him exactly as planned. Film critic Stephen Hunter wrote that Bronson had spent his career radiating male life force, stoic capability, and a charisma built from ambiguity, observing that while he was never a technically exceptional actor, he controlled a scene through presence alone, in ways technically exceptional actors frequently could not match. Roger Ebert's conclusion was simpler. The motion picture camera responded to Charles Bronson in a way it didn't respond to most people. And even standing completely still on screen, he projected the sense that something was about to happen. What a life like that leaves behind resists easy summary. The action genre carries his fingerprints throughout, in the moral weight assigned to vigilante figures, in the physical economy of screen violence, in the expectation that the quietest man in a room carries the most inside him. Bronson had told Ebert in 1974 that he thought of himself as a product, like a cake or a bar of soap that gets sold, which is either the most unsentimental self-assessment any major star ever offered, or the most accurate one. His path from coal mining in Pennsylvania through combat in the Pacific to 5 decades at the center of Hollywood stardom remains one of the more genuinely unlikely trajectories the film industry produced in the 20th century, and a love story running through his later years, beginning with a declaration to a friend and ending with ashes sealed in a cane beneath Vermont's soil, gives the whole thing a gravity that career achievement alone was never going to provide. Some people mark their work, and some people mark everyone who ever watches it. And Charles Bronson, without ever once appearing to try, managed both.